Welcome back. Today we'll be looking at Cain the Bull. Initially I was going to do both Cain and Abel, but even though they have the same weapon refine and pretty much the same stat line, I do think that they could be on separate videos, simply because their weapon types are different, meaning that Abel can run more things than Cain would be able to, especially on premium, which is why I do think that they can be considered fairly different. In a vacuum, they're pretty much the same. Again, they have the same stats, they have the same refine, but the difference in weapon types definitely changes that perspective in my opinion, which is why I'm only going to be looking at Cain this time around. Even so, there's quite a bit to go over with Cain, and we might as well get started with that. Cain comes with Bull Blade, which is a player phase brave sword that grants an X amount of attack and defense up to 6 points each, meaning that he has that leash, which can be a bit troublesome for someone like him, simply because the whole point of using cavalry units is to extend their movement as much as possible, or maybe get in and get out with minimal ease with stuff like Trace and Canto and whatnot. But I do feel that the leash that comes with Bull Blade is a bit too restrictive in my opinion. His stat line isn't too bad at 32-32 attack speed. At launch it was actually pretty decent because 32-32 was actually a pretty decent stat line to have. His 27 defense could be better. His res is definitely his dump stat, and 42 HP, you know, the deal with Gen 1 units. They have a pretty good amount of HP, especially considered nowadays. But at the time, and especially nowadays, I would say that his stat line's actually not too badly allocated. Still, there's plenty you could do with him on budget, and honestly, you could keep his weapon if you really want to, because there's good potential with it. If you want to use him on budget, you may as well just keep his innate Wings of Mercy and then use him with double attack defense bond. The reason we want to keep Wings of Mercy is simply because he could get into any sort of cavalry allies range with minimal ease. Even with his movement intact, it wouldn't be as much of a problem with Wings of Mercy active, and because he has Brave in his weapon, as long as he meets those conditions, his damage output will actually be significantly strong, on top of the fact that he won't really have to worry about counterattacks all too much so long as he can make the kill, which honestly shouldn't be too bad against lower defense foes, simply because Bull Blade being a 16 might weapon, on top of the additional attack and defense he may get from his weapon, on top of double attack defense bond, will actually make him deal a significant amount of damage. Of course, I also have attack smoke, which can actually help for tanking in the enemy phase, since once he's in there, he's not really going to get out unless he has some sort of dancer support or anything of the sort. That being said, you could also swap that for defense smoke if you want him to deal more damage on the following turn, or again, if he's danced and then he can simply just attack again, his damage output will be significantly better. But that being said, his defense is still on the lower side, especially at +1, so if you were to max invest into him, honestly, you may as well just ignore his defense stat a bit and go into speed, because it's actually not too bad at max investment. With Bull Blade granting Brave in the player phase, he should be able to reliably quad with Surge Sparrow, Trace, and Blade Session, since 42 base before any skills is actually pretty decent. That's also not taking any supports into account or anything of the sort. The reason I give him Ignis with Bull Blade is just so it has some synergy with his quads. Assuming the foe can counterattack, he'll be able to attack 4 times, assuming he also doubles naturally. And with Surge Sparrow, he will be able to heal back a majority of his HP, as long as he triggers his special. With Near Trace, he should also be able to get in and get out with no issue whatsoever, as long as he doesn't extend his movement. And then with Attack Smoke 4, he should have at least some sort of enemy phase combat prowess. Even though Bull Blade won't necessarily work, he will still get attack and defense if he is within 2 spaces of an ally, or a couple allies depending on how many, because it does max out at 6. But with Attack Smoke 4, he won't be as prone in the enemy phase. And Blade Session is there just so he can get more attack and speed, which is never too bad whatsoever. Honestly, you could keep Wings of Mercy on him simply because he still has to be within 2 spaces of a cavalry ally that uses his sword, lance, or axe, so it's never really too bad. But at least with Trace, he can have more flexibility with his leash. He can go in, and he can still maintain his leash if you really need him to, so it's never really the worst. But with that being said, he still faces a good amount of competition in the 3 and 4 star pool, mainly from Eliwood, who's basically a really solid sword cavalry unit with all... Assuming most people already know how Eliwood works, he basically gets steady impact with Special Fighter, and that's his weapon. And it's really good, especially with his stat line. It actually makes up for a good amount of his defense being on the lower end, and then he actually just becomes a pretty decent stat ball. Cain could potentially end up having more attack, and because he does have Brave, he can honestly end up dealing more damage in the long term, but because of his leech, he is a lot more limited in scope, as opposed to Eliwood, who could go in and get out whenever he feels like it with Gale Force and Trace, meaning that flexibility-wise, I would say that Eliwood has the key advantage. However, damage output-wise, Cain could potentially outperform him. That being said, you also have to keep in mind that Special Fighter in Eliwood's weapon means that he can spam 4 cooldown specials on every second hit, which is really, really significant. And then you pair that with something like Surge Sparrow, and he's getting as much healing, if not more consistently than Cain is, which means that overall, Eliwood is definitely a much better unit. But Cain isn't too bad whatsoever if you really want that gotcha moment with Wings of Mercy and Bullblade. And then comparatively to other sword cav units, there really aren't that many other options outside of Seth. And that's just mainly through an inheritable perspective and stat line perspective. Stat-wise, Seth and Cain are pretty similar offensively. Cain does have a bit more of an edge when it comes to his offensive prowess, simply because of Bullblade. But Seth does have his defense stat, which does actually allow him to tank a lot more in the enemy phase, which is rather nice if you have to take a hit. That being said, when it comes to inheritable options with swords, it's not exactly the most amazing. The closest thing we have to replicating any sort of speedy Brave Sword is Ninja Katana, but because it's only 9 might, it's not really going to be doing too much for someone with only 32 base attack. So honestly, you're really not going to be missing out on anything if you just choose Cain over Seth, but stat line wise, they're pretty much the same, and Bullblade isn't exactly the most amazing PRF anyway, so you could always just pick favorites with Seth, and it's not really going to be making too much of a difference. The key takeaway here is that Eliwood's pretty much just unfair, stealing Brave Roy's PRF like that, but what can you do? And that's about it for the Cain video. Let me know down below if there's another unit you would like to see me discuss. If you want to see more of these types of videos, make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, thanks for watching.